somewhere out there, right now, your DNA is carrying the genetic fingerprint of a species most people have never heard of, and it got there because two very different kinds of humans ran into each other in the dark and didn't walk away. That's not a metaphor. It's a measurable, sequenced, scientific fact sitting inside the cells of billions of people alive today. We've spent generations telling a story about human origins where we were the sole survivors, the last ones standing after everyone else faded out. The genetics don't support that story anymore. What they support is stranger, older, and far more unsettling. It starts with a bone fragment the size of your thumbnail. No face attached to it, no skull, no skeleton, just a sliver of something that almost got tossed into a pile of unidentified animal remains. Scientists almost threw it out, and then they ran the DNA, and everything we thought we knew about human history quietly fell apart. This video is about the moment our ancestors first encountered other humans, not metaphorically, not in mythology, but literally, other species of people. Walking, thinking, breathing people who were not us. And what makes this story so wild is that the evidence isn't buried in some ancient text. It's buried in your DNA, right now, if you're not of exclusively sub-Saharan African descent. You are, in a very literal sense, the living proof of what happened when two worlds collided. Most people have a rough idea that Neanderthals existed and that we somehow outlasted them, but the actual story is so much stranger than that. There wasn't just one other human species sharing the planet with our ancestors. There were multiple. They were spread across continents. And our ancestors didn't just avoid them, they had children with them, repeatedly, across thousands of years. And one single bone fragment, found in a cave in Siberia, gave us the most jaw-dropping proof of that fact that science has ever produced. Here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with that bone and the discovery that stopped researchers cold. Then we'll get into the genetics, what it revealed about when and where these encounters happened, and how many times they actually occurred. And then we'll get to the part that almost nobody talks about, the layer of the story that goes even deeper into a species so ancient it barely has a name, and what it tells us about just how far back this first contact really goes. Let's start with the second most important discovery in this whole story, because it sets up everything else. In 2008, archaeologists digging in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia pulled out a tiny piece of finger bone. In the remote reaches of Siberia, they retrieved a sliver of bone from Denisova Cave, a pinky finger no larger than a child's marble. It sat in storage for 2 years. Nobody was particularly excited about it. 2 years later, in 2010, the DNA results came back, and nobody quite knew what to do with them. The mitochondrial DNA didn't match modern humans. It didn't match Neanderthals. It didn't match anything anyone had ever seen before. The discovery of the Denisovans flipped the traditional model of paleoanthropology on its head. Until then, new hominin species were named based on bones. Here, bones came second to molecules. Scientists had just identified an entirely new branch of the human family tree, not from a skull, not from a skeleton, but from a fragment of a child's finger. They named them Denisovans, after the cave. And here's the thing that makes this genuinely unsettling. No complete skeletons or skulls have ever been found for this species. The Denisovans' physical legacy is scarce. Researchers have only attributed 3 teeth, a pinky, and either an arm or leg fragment to the mysterious species. An entire branch of humanity, confirmed to have lived across a massive stretch of Asia for over 100,000 years, and we still can't fully picture what they looked like. They exist, more than anything else, as a genetic ghost. But then came the part that made even the researchers who found the finger bone look like they'd seen something they weren't supposed to see. The data revealed not only that Denisovans were a sister group to Neanderthals, but that their DNA survived in modern humans. The implications were vast. The Denisovans had been widespread, and they had interbred with Homo sapiens. And the populations carrying the most Denisovan DNA weren't in Siberia, where the bones were found. Their DNA matched about 4% to 6% of the DNA of the modern humans indigenous to Australia, Melanesia, and other areas of the Western Pacific. These two groups, one living in a cold Siberian cave, the other eventually making it to the Pacific, had met somewhere, had children, and those children's descendants are alive today. Now here's where the story gets even more layered, and this is the thread I want you to hold on to for the rest of the video, because the biggest reveal comes at the end. We knew Denisovans and modern humans had mixed. We knew Neanderthals and modern humans had mixed. What nobody expected was what happened when scientists found a bone that proved those two groups had also mixed with each other, and left behind a child. One of the greatest discoveries relating to interbreeding between human species was that of a first-generation Neanderthal-Denisovan hybrid, an individual whose parents belonged to two distinct species of humans. The bone was found in 2,012 inches, the same Denisova Cave. Denny's remains consist of a single fossilized fragment of a long bone discovered among over 2,000 visually unidentifiable fragments excavated at the Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains, Russia. It sat in a box with thousands of other unidentified scraps. It was stored in a collection of over 2,000 unidentified bone fragments until 2016, when protein analysis on many of the fragments was performed to see whether they were human or animal. Denisova 11 turned out to be human and was then sent for more detailed analysis. The fossil turned out to be from a girl, now nicknamed Denny, who was at least 13 years old and lived some 90,000 years ago. When the DNA results came back, the lead paleogeneticist on the project initially assumed something had gone wrong with the analysis. The results were showing roughly 50% Neanderthal DNA and 50% Denisovan DNA. That's not a distant ancestor thing, that's a direct parent thing. DNA evidence reveals the bone originally came from a girl who was the daughter of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Her mother was Neanderthal, her father was Denisovan. She was, in the most literal sense possible, the child of two different human species. And, to date, she is the only first-generation hybrid hominin ever discovered. Think about what that means for a second. Researchers had long suspected these two groups crossed paths. They'd been finding traces of overlapping DNA in later populations for years. But finding the actual offspring? I never thought we would be so lucky as to find an actual offspring of the two groups, one of the study's researchers said. That teenager, that single bone fragment, is still the only direct physical evidence ever recovered of a first-generation cross between two extinct human species. And it gets even more interesting when you look at the father's genetics. The researchers found that the Denisovan father of Denisova 11 had at least one Neanderthal ancestor, possibly as far back as 300 to 600 generations before his lifetime. So the Denisovan father already had Neanderthal ancestry in him, and then he had a child with a Neanderthal woman. From this single genome, we are able to detect multiple instances of interactions between Neanderthals and Denisovans, one of the researchers noted. One bone, one teenager, a whole web of ancient encounters encoded in her DNA. Now, all of this raises an obvious question. How often was this actually happening? Was Denny a freak accident, two individuals who happened to meet in a cave, or was this a regular occurrence across a much wider world? The genetics say it was regular, very regular, and new research has started to pin down exactly when and how it happened, and the timeline is much tighter than anyone expected. New research refines the timeline of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals, showing it began about 50,500 years ago and lasted roughly 7,000 years. That sounds like a long time, but on an evolutionary scale, it's almost nothing. Neanderthals had been in Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans showed up. And the window where the two groups actually mixed, had children, and exchanged DNA that persisted into the future was a single narrow era. Not a long, drawn-out coexistence, a specific moment in time. Scientists publishing in Nature and Science have been able to say with certainty that a period of interbreeding between Neanderthals and humans happened roughly 47,000 years ago. And here's the part that quietly rewrote something much bigger than just the interbreeding timeline. Two new studies suggest that interbreeding occurred during a limited period of time as ancient humans left Africa. Clarifying that timeline narrows the possible range of time when humans spread to new continents. Because every population outside of Africa, people in East Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, the Pacific, all carry the same Neanderthal interbreeding signature, the same one, from the same event. Which means none of those populations could have split off and migrated to their eventual homelands before that interbreeding happened. The genetics of a single encounter became a timestamp for the entire human diaspora. So, with modern humans and Neanderthals, it was one main event, roughly 47,000 years ago, lasting about 7,000 years, and leaving non-African populations with 1 to 2% Neanderthal ancestry, contributing traits like immune resilience and skin pigmentation. With Denisovans, though, the story is messier, and that's actually where it gets most interesting. The mixing with Denisovans didn't happen once. Genetic analysis confirms it happened at least twice, in different places, with different populations of modern humans. The group that eventually became the ancestors of people in Papua New Guinea and Australia appears to have mixed with Denisovans in a completely separate event from the one that left traces in mainland Asian populations. Same extinct species, different encounters, different times, different places, and scientists still aren't entirely sure where any of it happened. Researchers openly acknowledge they can't pinpoint the location of the Denisovan human mixing, only narrowing it down to somewhere in Eastern Asia, possibly as far as Indonesia or Australia. The geography of humanity's first contact is still genuinely unsettled. And then there's the timing question, which is where the Denisovan story takes a turn that almost nobody talks about. As recently as 15,000 years ago, humans shared their world with another group of upright hominins called the Denisovans. 15,000 years ago. That's not the deep prehistoric past in the way most people picture it. Agriculture was just getting started around that time. People were already crossing into the Americas. The woolly mammoth was still alive. And somewhere in the Pacific region, there were still Denisovans, and they were still encountering and mixing with modern humans. That would make them the last non-Homo sapiens humans to walk the earth, outliving Neanderthals by tens of thousands of years. And we barely talk about them. Now, if you're finding this as wild as I do, drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious whether you knew any of this before watching. And if you've ever wondered how much of this ancient DNA is actually doing something useful in your body right now, there's a video on this channel that goes deep on exactly that. It's worth watching after this one. But stay here, because we haven't gotten to the deepest layer yet. And this is the one that really reframes the entire story. Remember how I said the Denisovans and Neanderthals were sister groups, that they split from a common ancestor and then went their separate ways? What genetic modeling has started to reveal is that those ancestors themselves were not operating in an empty world either. There's a population buried even deeper in our ancestry. Researchers sometimes call them superarchaics, that split off from the main human lineage nearly 2 million years ago. And the ancestors of both Neanderthals and Denisovans mixed with them too. Long before Neanderthals existed as Neanderthals, long before Denisovans had a name, the interbreeding wasn't a single event in human history. It was a pattern. A recurring feature of what it meant to be human, going back so far that the species involved don't even have proper names yet. So when we ask, when did ancient humans realize they weren't the only humans on Earth? The honest answer is, they never lived in a world where they were. Every branch of the human family tree, as far back as the genetics can reach, seems to have encountered and mixed with something else. The isolation we imagine, one species, alone, slowly becoming us, doesn't appear to have existed. It's a clean story we told ourselves before the DNA started talking. And the DNA has been saying something remarkable. That interbreeding left Eurasians with many genes inherited from Neanderthal ancestors, which in total make up between 1% and 2% of our genomes today. Those genes aren't just sitting there doing nothing. Neanderthal genes boosted immunity, skin pigmentation, and adaptation to harsh climates. The encounter that happened 47,000 years ago in some unnamed place as our ancestors pushed out of Africa didn't just produce children, it produced advantages. Traits that helped people survive cold climates, fight off new diseases, adapt to environments they'd never seen. The other humans didn't disappear without a trace. They became part of us. The discovery of Denisova 11 may support the notion that Neanderthals and Denisovans may not have undergone direct extinction but were partly assimilated into modern human populations. That's a quiet but enormous reframing. They didn't just vanish. In a real, measurable, genetic sense, they're still here. So here's where we've landed. A bone fragment the size of your thumbnail, almost discarded as animal remains, turned out to be a 90,000-year-old girl with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, the only confirmed first-generation hybrid between two extinct human species ever found. A separate pinky bone from a Siberian cave identified an entire species that science didn't know existed. New genetic dating pinned the Neanderthal-human interbreeding to a narrow window around 47,000 years ago, and that window accidentally told us when humans reached every other continent. The Denisovans may have survived until 15,000 years ago, making them the last non-sapiens humans to ever live. And the mixing didn't start with us. It goes back in layers, through the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans themselves, into populations so old they barely have names. The moment ancient humans realized they weren't the only humans on Earth wasn't a single moment. It was every morning they woke up in a world that was already full. If this is the kind of deep dive you want more of, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from, and the next video is going to hit just as hard.